There we go, Alex Antic there, Liberal Senator for South Australia. You might hear a bit more about him in the months and years to come. Now, we showed you last night the successful launch of the SpaceX mission to take new astronauts to the International Space Station. Let's dip into some live pictures now as those astronauts actually go on board the International Space Station, hugging and meeting and congratulating each other because there are other astronauts there, of course, who will be heading back to Earth. Now, you can see these pictures. I can't see them. I can see them out of the corner of my eye on another station. I'm getting my 8 cents worth at the moment. But live pictures there from the International Space Station, just extraordinary after that successful launch yesterday. It's about a more than 24-hour journey it has been for them to get up there and successfully dock. The docking's taken quite some time this afternoon, our time, but there they are on board the station, catching up with the other astronauts on board, and that is just going to become ever more regular as an occurrence now that the Americans can do that from their own soil with their own commercial spacecraft rather than having to pay the Russians that they've been doing more recently. So let's come back to Earth with a thud now and start talking about the national economy and the states, the biggest state, the largest state, certainly economically and population in this country, is New South Wales. State budget today deeply into the black straight away. Let's cross to Perth, though, and catch up with the Chief Executive of the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, James Pearson. Good to talk to you, James. First up, just this budget. If New South Wales has been sent from what was going to be a small surplus to a $6 or $7 billion deficit, and then it's going to go double that, more than double that, almost triple it in the year we're in, it just shows the economic hardship that has afflicted this country.
Well, I think borrowing, Chris, is the new black, isn't it? And look, the Reserve Bank Governor himself, Philip Lowe, has made it clear that he wants to see state and territory governments taking advantage of money that's the cheapest it's ever been, and interest rates are going to stay low for the foreseeable future, to use that money to invest in building a platform that will support a long-term economic recovery for Australia. So the federal government has shown the way with its unprecedented spending and investment, and now we're seeing states like New South Wales follow suit. I think what's important about the New South Wales budget today as well is that they've taken some dramatic permanent measures to make investment in their state more attractive and to boost the economy. And it'll be really interesting to see what the response will be from other states and territories.
Well, of course, some of the other states are going to have much worse budget situations. Of course, New South Wales will be in a better position because of the way it's managed the pandemic. Obviously, Victoria is going to be in dire straits. But as you say, they're going to keep investing in infrastructure. But I thought, interestingly, there's a couple of decisions here and a couple of ideas floated from New South Wales that could have dramatic ramifications right around the country. Now, we know unemployment's going to go up. It's going to hit 7.5% in New South Wales. But the New South Wales government has still cut payroll tax. Now, that's obviously to try and stimulate employment, and that's something that other states are going to have to keep looking at as well.
Well, payroll tax is a tax on jobs, pure and simple, and it's a tax which the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry and our member chambers of commerce around the country have been campaigning to reduce the burden of for a long time now, and we'll keep working on that. So full marks to the New South Wales government for making those cuts in the rate of payroll tax and also lifting the threshold at which the tax cuts in. As well as that, for those small businesses that don't pay payroll tax, they're making available $1,500 cash vouchers to be used to spend on government fees and charges. So it's good to see they're thinking about those smaller businesses that have already gotten away from the payroll tax net. You know, something very interesting which the New South Wales government has done today, and that is commit to phasing out stamp duty. And why that is interesting.
Well, this is what I wanted to ask you about, James. This is the idea that I wanted to talk to you about, because if New South Wales does it, then other states are going to do it. And the idea here is to take away that disincentive to buying a house. When you buy a house, you hit up front with an additional $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in stamp duty. And their idea for getting rid of this is quite good. That is that when you're buying this house in the future, you might have the choice to either pay that stamp duty up front or just go to an annual land tax. But once you make that call, that house, no matter how many times it changes ownership, will stay on a flat land tax. This is going to really help people who want to buy a house or shift house, and it obviously gives the government a more stable revenue source for years to come, doesn't it?
Well, it does. And look, and I come from Canberra, where we're based, and the government there's already embarked on a scheme like this. What's interesting too is that this will actually, by making it less costly to move, to sell and buy your property, it actually will encourage people to move to where the jobs are. And I think in the future economy, we're going to see people wanting to be able to be more flexible in upping stakes and moving to where employment is. So look, full marks to New South Wales. What we need to see now is that the state and territory treasurers, they come together in a body called the Federal Council of Financial Relations. It's kind of like the National Cabinet for treasurers. What we want to see is the Commonwealth play a leadership role in that council and encourage the states and territories to work together and deliver on some meaningful long-term tax reform. Payroll tax, issues like stamp duty.
I think the stamp duty one is so important, as you say, because that stamp duty is a huge disincentive to selling one house and buying the other. So it stops people moving to a new job interstate or in another town. It stops people even making the move to be closer to their workplace. It also is a disincentive for people who might want to downsize their accommodation. So it just adds that flexibility, which I think is a great idea. I want to come back to that in just a moment. But before I do, what about these vouchers, though, where they're handing out $100 in vouchers to all people in New South Wales to go and spend at restaurants and cafes? Isn't this just the churn of taxpayers' dollars? Wouldn't it be better just to lift the restrictions on businesses or just cut taxes further?
Well, I'm always interested in seeing the overall tax burden reduced to reward aspiration and encourage people to be entrepreneurial and take risks and create more jobs. Look, the restaurant and catering industry, the hospitality, the events, the entertainment industry, they've been smashed and smashed hard and long by the pandemic. And so a measure like this is actually going to help them. It's something that they've wanted, and it's going to increase the likelihood that people will go out, spend money, keep something in the till and keep businesses going and keep people employed. Look, it's the kind of measure that's going to be a temporary measure while we get through the crisis, but that longer-term economic reform goal, we must not lose sight of that. And we want to see the states, the territories, with the Commonwealth Government leading, working together to get more consistency across our federation, more clarity across our country in terms of lowering the tax burden, particularly to encourage people to go into business, to invest in business, to grow and to create jobs. That's what we need, a long-term platform of tax reform right across the country. Individual states competing with each other, it's got its place, but at the end of the day, that could be a zero-sum game unless we attract more foreign investment and create jobs using foreign investment, as well as making Australia as a whole a more attractive place in which to do business.
Well, just finally, what about the states and their response to the pandemic? You're in Western Australia now. They've thrown up another hard border against South Australia now. There are new restrictions on business, some of them closed in South Australia now on the basis of a cluster at this stage of 20 people, possibly 34. I mean, this is just unsustainable, isn't it? How is the country and the economy and communities and society going to be able to function properly if these states slap in lockdowns and throw up hard borders every time there's a relatively modest cluster or outbreak?
Chris, it's less than a week since we had a national cabinet meeting which brought together the state and territory leaders with the Prime Minister, and they committed, at least that's what I heard them do, they committed to a plan which would be targeted, proportional, localised responses in the inevitable case of having increases in community transmission. Less than a few days later, we have an outbreak in part of Adelaide, and bang, that sound you hear is the sound of borders slamming shut. And it's not just West Australia, it's other states as well. It's really disappointing. These are a very blunt measure when we can actually do better than this. We can target, we can plan, and they're ignoring their own health triggers that they agreed to last week. So it's very disappointing. And look, businesses right across the country, they're holding their heads in the hand in this. We want to make this a COVID normal Christmas. This is not the way to go about it. It's time for people to take a Bex and lie down. Let's actually work out nimble, targeted, proportional responses based on agreed health criteria, like what the National Cabinet agreed less than a week ago.
Spot on, James. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks again, Chris.
James Pearson there, who heads up the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry.